I had more to say. You probably play those hit indie games by Toby Fox, Undertale and Deltarune. They're slow and wacky and mysterious characters. If you've only played Deltarune, then you probably ignored this screen. Sure, the game's technically a sequel, but it's a different universe and its own story. Just like this video. It's technically a
sequel of
my Kris is the Night Mega Theory video, but you don't have to watch it to get this one. That video did reach the conclusion that Kris is making the fountains and that Noelle and Susie will make ones at some point, and furthermore that anyone that makes a fountain is the knight of that dark world. This video isn't about Kris. This video will be a lot more focused on the story implications of this anyone knight idea and the questions I've been asked about the theory. I also want to properly put this all in one place to go with a proper summary for people to look back on and laugh. Though after all of the Kris Suciel Knight stuff, I'll be going through some new evidence and counterpoints that I should have put in the last video. And then go watch the first part for more, I guess. It's not a perfect video in some parts, hence I'm making this to improve, to add on, and to also not look stupid because I think I got too mad in the video. Even if it's exaggerated for a bit. I'm 21 and I gotta stop embarrassing myself on the internet. No more complaining and acting like everything I say is true. That doesn't mean I'm not gonna be overly critical though. So, it's time for the theory then. In the Gunner Maker, at the start of the game, we get to name ourselves and the vessel. The weird thing is that if you name yourself after specific characters in the game, then you'll get a reaction. These names are a bit random. Some returning side characters from Undertale are there, like QC and Gerson, but Burger Pants and Temmie are not. Almost the entire class is on the list, but some are left out. People think Alvin has some importance, but Gerson is the one that's on there instead. It can't be explained like the main Deltarune characters and Undertale characters plus shopkeepers, except these ones or whatever. It's clunky, and the fact that one has to say except destroys it all. There is intent here. It's not like in Undertale where the names were jokes. The different characters we know name ourselves after don't just jump in and say a joke. No jokes, just 4 different reactions. One of them being based on us giving the same name twice. Of course, they're the same. This is someone commenting on how we put ourselves into video games, even though these characters are separate from us. If it's like that, then the reaction we get from naming ourselves based on different characters should be important too. We know it's Gaster from all the Gaster connections, like his motif straight up being in the background music. Gaster analyzes our saves and our survey results. There has to be intent here. There has to be an in-universe explanation. It's called a survey program after all. These specific names being reacted to should make sense, or else what's even the point of the survey and all the other questions? What importance could these people have, and why are Kris, Susie, and Noelle separated from them? Entry number 17, Darker Yet Darker, seem to be related to Dark Worlds. A short Another Hymn clip plays when entering a Dark World. Same texture used in the background for the opening is used for the fountains. These are some weird connections between Gaster and the Dark Fountains. Is he controlling the fountains, or is it something else weird? Well, yes. The files that are related to Gaster are all in uppercase.
Just like how the Wingdings are in uppercase.
Songs might be in all uppercase in the soundtrack sometimes, but not in the files. The reason this is important is because the song Gallery plays right before each boss fight, next to the fountain. When you ask Spamton about the night, he says this.
Speaking of communion, Kris, did you know that the night...
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to!
Too many excess vacation days? Take a goddamn vacation straight to hell!
Communion means intimate fellowship, a sort of connection. When the lightner makes a fountain, they're in communion with the fountain. Spamton gets interrupted when talking about the night by some supposed unknown force and then acts scared about what just happened as if he wasn't allowed to say that.
Kris, did you know that the night
Doesn't exist.
He could say something like that. or at least something that implies the knight is not running around making the fountains in the light world. And Spamton doesn't even know who the knight is, because they aren't really anybody. I don't know if Gaster is directly manipulating them, or if it's just the fountain doing it by itself. But I know for a fact that the fountain is changing the darkness, and it made them think they saw the knight. After all, it is what gives them life, so it could do this too. Sweet Cap and Cake say that Queen changed when the fountain appeared, not the knight.
Not like they know the lore. LMAO.
Queen says she just assumed what the knight wanted, based on their actions. All she has is the video of the fountain's creation, where it's hard to see who even made it. That means Darkners wouldn't recognize who made their fountain. This is pretty similar to King. Toby said this on the anniversary stream out of the blue.
I mean, I think that fountain definitely changed his behavior. For sure.
If Gaster has all of these connections, then it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume that the names are related to the Dark Worlds in some way. It would make sense, and it is related to the main plot of the game. These names are people who will interact with the Dark Worlds. That would explain why it's only Lightners, because it's more about them. These are people who will enter a Dark World, while these are people who'll make a Dark World. How does that match up with the names? Well, Kris, Susie, and Noelle are the only characters who are put focus on when it comes to making later fountains or being the knight. Queen talks about Noelle making a bunch of neo-dark fountains. Queen asks if Kris and Susie wants to be the new knight in the weird route when Noelle isn't there at the end. Kris literally makes one. Planned ahead with plugging in the TV so they could turn it on just like how the laptop was left on.
And became yours truly.
The TV that was dusty was only being used when Astriel was at home, and its remote was stuck under the sofa pillows. Nobody else had any reason to plug it in. And Queen uses these names as examples of how anyone can make a fountain. This seems like a pattern. It's obvious foreshadowing. What about the Lightners that don't make fountains? Birdley has entered the Dark World. People think that Toriel and Undyne are going to be in Chapter 3, so that checks out. Asgore, Astriel, Alphys, Sans, and Papyrus are all returning characters from Undertale. They have had character icons then and now, so it seems like they'll be important. They must be returning for a reason. Specific locations that people think are going to be Dark World locations would match up with them. Gerson is dead, but he could appear as a dead corpse, being brought back to life as a Darkner, or as a drawing Alvin drew of him in the unused classroom, or brought back through Oberon Smog style. Gerson could be in the church. Alvin getting focus but not being on the list while Gerson is there explains why Alvin is getting focus. He's just a character setting up the actual important character. Rudy is on the list. He's Noelle's dad. He's been really sick, and it seems like Noelle might try to save and heal her dad in the Dark World, which could be her motivation for opening a Dark World. A hospital Dark World is also a popular pick. What about the other names, like Caddy, Jockington, Caddy, Braddy, and QC? Why would a side character like QC be important? Why would Susie make a fountain? Caddy doesn't like Susie. Susie mentioned this to Kris. This is setting up a character arc between them, where they learn to grow closer. Susie has been learning magic from Moralse, and she also knows how to make a fountain via Queen. Caddy is into magic, so Susie would then make a fountain to show Caddy that she knows actual magic. However this argument gets started isn't important. This would start in QC's diner, since that's where she works. Caddy, QC, Jockington, and Caddy are all characters on the list that we've seen at QC's diner. Jockington and Caddy are there to support Caddy, so they would come again just for her, and QC owns the place. Those characters being on the list and on this location shows that it's gravitating towards this. I'm unsure about Braddy, but she could show up here in this Dark World too. Caddy and Susie are not friends, but they have set up for the arc, and they're a cat and a reptile, just like Caddy and Braddy. They're not friends now, but they could get closer like they were in Undertale. It's already happening to Alphys and Undyne as well. This explains why a background character like this can be on the list. You can only be in the light world and be important, or a background character. You can also travel to a dark world and be important, or a background character. This explains why some characters that might seem important aren't on the list, because they're not important specifically to the Dark Worlds, like the Mayor, Des, or Pizza Pants. The night is just a relationship between a lightner making a fountain and the fountain itself, and or Gaster gastering within the fountain or something. I mean, it doesn't say that the night made the fountain, just someone. Wait, that isn't on the list of the names? And that's the main gist of my theory. My general idea is that Kris made the first 3 fountains, and Susie and Noelle will also make ones at some point, except for the ground fountain. Basically only these 3 people. There are 2 ways it could go. There might be something that makes Kris special, that makes only them the night. And if the others make a fountain, it won't make the darkness say, the night made the fountain, aka just Kris Night. Or anyone that makes a fountain is the night of that dark world. I've already discussed in the first video why Kris could be special, but I concluded there too that Kris isn't special. Sorry. And ever since I made that video, I've gotten some criticism. And since Kris Night was a much older theory, I was able to pretty much put every counterpoint in one video. But here we are. With these supposed debunks, I'll be able to talk more in depth in regards to my theory. I'll be going from the worst counterpoint to the most reasonable. The big 3. There would be no villain or conflict. These important characters are missing from the Gunner Maker list. And this outside game content tells us there is a singular night, aka the scrapped opening, and also Nightmare Night. I have a lot to say about both of those. So let's buckle up. What exactly would this mean for the story? And where would it go from here? There wouldn't be any antagonist or conflict with it. It would be anticlimactic for there to be no villain, and for characters to be calling them the Roaring Night, but it turns out the fountain made them just think so. When the night is revealed to be anyone making the fountain, then that doesn't technically change anything that happened before it. Characters go through growth, fountains can cause the roaring, and Kris making fountains. The truth that Kris made those fountains is something that will most likely be revealed to the other characters, and then conflict surrounding this will happen. A lot of fountains all at once will cause the roaring, no matter if there is a night or not. Characters escaping to these dark worlds have helped them connect with others and grow as people. In fact, the night is just an afterthought in all of this. Ravel barely talks about them and doesn't mention them in the prophecy.
You know, the same character that knows when specific scenes are supposed to happen and also seems to have gotten the prophecy from Gaster.
The conflict and plot we see is heavily focused on the main Lightners and interconnected dark worlds. The plot is related to the issues the Lightners project onto the worlds.
Why would Noelle be talking about living in a world controlled by Queen if she knows it's just a dream? This is where we put our literary analysis goggles on and see that Noelle is actually talking to her overbearing mother through talking to Queen. It's a simple speculative jump that is supported by basically everything else we see in canon about Noelle's mom.
The Knight is a fake villain made for the amusement of Lightners, which is pretty fitting since the Dark Worlds are designed to amuse the Lightners and help them learn more about themselves. Susie becomes friends with Kris, and Noelle becomes more comfortable with herself. Why would an evil villain be making these? Whether or not the Knight is just a title, the person that created the fountain so far being a character who actually takes part in the plot would be better. If it's just Alphys or someone else random, then that would make this the Knight presence feel really disconnected to the main plot of the game. Kris Knight or Kris Susiel Knight fits with this just being the main characters, so I think it's safe to rule out most candidates for having made the fountains, though there are some other candidates that still exist with this in mind, albeit flawed, but we'll get to those later. People say the Knight is one night because they call themselves the Roaring Knight, and Queen didn't even know what the roaring was, which means they lied so they could make the roaring happen. This is the villainous character that wants the roaring. First off, if it wanted the roaring to happen, then it would have happened by now. They could have created a gazillion fountains and even called themselves the Roaring Knight to King, but he doesn't call them the Roaring Knight.
Only me LMAO.
Secondly, every story doesn't need a villain or a clear
Main.
antagonist character, like Finding Nemo, Swiss Army Man,
Kiki's Delivery Service.
Forrest Gump, and also Undertale, maybe? You could make the argument that it doesn't have a clear antagonist character in a way. You could say Asgore, but he only shows up at the end and he gets killed by Flowey. who's the final boss in 2 routes. You could say Flowey, but he's also barely present from our point of view through the game, and in the No Mercy route, we're the ones doing all the harm. It's the idea to be killed or be killed, and how far that can take someone. It explains why it switches from Flowey to our completionist gaming instincts as the antagonist in the No Mercy route, because it doesn't really switch. Each area has their own separate character that's an antagonizing force in some way, and then you eventually redeem them, even with Flowey. Every Dark World so far has had its own Dark World antagonist, kinda like this as well. So there's still characters to go up against. But I do think there could be a big antagonist. It's clear it could be setting up something. But where would the role for the main antagonist even move? I did imply that I thought Gaster was gonna be the real antagonist in the original video, but now I wanna make it clear. With this theory of any one night, it flows pretty naturally over to Gaster. The Night Force, what we think the antagonist is, already has plenty of connections to Gaster, like I showed off earlier. Gastering in the fountain gives him agency in the plot, and does shit without really being there. The villains are doing what they're doing because of him, and is also the first character we literally meet in the game. Similar to Flowey, he would also be like Asgore. Each antagonist in each area was fundamentally doing something because of Asgore, protecting you from him, becoming a royal guard, and getting closer to people, for example Asgore, and straight up helping him. Asgore is a subversion of a big bad villain. He's built up throughout the entire game, and when we finally meet him, we see that he has heart, and then he gets killed by a more powerful character. The Knight is a subversion as well. People are expecting the prophecy to be subverted in some way, with how it's been playing it straight with the RPG tropes. The Knight is one of those things, and if we take a step back, then we'll see that they weren't there to begin with. If you really wanted to, then you could view Gaster as the Knight, in the sense that him gastering the Dark Nurse to his will when the Light Nurse makes the
Fountain
is what makes him the Knight. That makes it really go full circle. The goalpost wouldn't be moving at all. It's still at the Knight. This someone isn't the Knight, it's him. I mean, what's with them sharing the hand motif? Yes, I made Gaster being the Knight make sense. Doesn't really make sense when he's running around. Gaster being in the fountain doing the gastering does make it possible to separate these two mysterious entities from this sham dialogue. But also, why would Gaster go out of this scary place he's stuck inside just to make the secret bosses go crazy? Actually, I've never seen anyone provide a satisfying answer for how he's able to do this. Spaptic could easily get a phone call from Gaster depending on the events of the timeline or how everything works. But they both seem to have gone mad before the fountain's creation, and Jevel straight up met someone. So how is Gaster able to even go out and make the secret bosses go crazy to begin with if he's stuck somewhere scary? Ooh. Not suggesting it isn't Gaster, but I'm just curious as to how he's in this many places all at once. Some think he's also the man, which makes it even harder to keep track of. Different shattered piece of Gaster maybe? I don't know. There could still be an antagonist with this theory. He could be the antagonist, or there isn't a clear antagonist character and he's just a really important character with power. He could be evil, he could be morally gray or good. Antagonist doesn't necessarily mean evil. I can understand the need for a big mysterious guy in your story, but it doesn't necessarily need that. It's a little black and white to think otherwise, I think. People say that the Knight's identity is being treated as a mystery. So it being Kris would be weird for some, because then we already have the answer. But with this theory, they still made those. But then we still have a mystery that we're supposed to figure out, which is that the Knight is just a title given to the fountain creator. Though I can't really see this as a mystery. If this is a whodunit mystery, then the game should go through each of the candidates and directly show us a motivation specifically for why they would want to create the fountains. And the game has only shown Kris making a fountain, and also Susie and Noelle talking about how Dark Worlds aren't that bad.
This is where I escaped to, so I'm looking for any sort of validation. Please.
So, doesn't seem anticlimactic. Alright, the story can still make sense. It isn't as black and white one could think. But what about the supposed missing setup? There are missing characters that are probably important to Deltarune, like Alvin, Mayor, and Des. There is the obvious point I said earlier, that this is not an importance list, just a Dark World interaction list, but I do have more to say. For this section, I want to go through not just the points about the missing characters, but also some night candidates that still exist, because one of them is one of those supposed missing characters. And I want to clear up every loose end and potential directions with the theory. While this anyone that makes a fountain is the Knight of that Dark World theory pretty much debunk almost every single Knight theory because it's only Kris, Susie, and Noelle on the list. There's still a few Knight theories left that I'm not obligated to view as impossible because of it. If the Darkness say that the Knight made this Dark World in Chapter 3, that doesn't necessarily confirm that Kris made the previous ones, because it could be anyone. But who? There are actually 3 characters we can't see the reaction for. They're kinda on the list, in a way. It really depends on how you want to look at it. If they're on the list, then they could fall under the same list as Kris, Susie, and Noelle, or even be the actual Knight, and these are just random people who'll make fountains. The Vessel, Gaster, and Des. With the Vessel, we can't see what the reaction the Vessel gets, because we're making it, so we can't give the name we're naming it. So it could be making fountains for all we know. Does it count? Does it not? We can't really know. If there's one thing all the people on the making fountains list have in common, is that they're just kids doing stuff for sympathetic reasons. The Vessel isn't that, so it's a weird break from the pattern. For Gaster, we can't see the reaction for his name, because the game crashes. And because it's him doing the survey, I guess. But is that something that actually happens by Gaster's command or by some other force instead? It's the person who made the surveys and he doesn't want you to use his name, so he might not even count. Either way, I don't like the idea of Gaster running around making fountains. There is actually a fountain in the game plenty of people think he did create separately from the Knight. I'm actually a little unsure about that fountain myself, with this theory at least. The Grand Fountain. He should be stuck here, so how can he make it? Why control the Dark World from within the fountain instead of just making more? This is the best I've got. Gaster somehow managed to make some of the darkness in the realm he's stuck inside bleed over to the light world in this supply closet. Or it happened by itself or by accident. But he wasn't able to replicate it. So he tried getting out to people in the light world so more darkness could bleed over. That could be the reason for why the events of the game are happening to begin with. Whether or not he would count himself isn't important, but I had to say this. This isn't grounded on anything, but I feel like that's the most reasonable explanation if it's not Kris that made it, since they're scared of it because they didn't make it. But it's also right by the fountain Kris or even the Knight did create. So it's a little weird they didn't notice it. If it is Kris, then they made it by accident and they're like, oh fuck. Well, I don't really think anything important happened here. I'm not happy that my theory is able to debunk Knight theories I hate, but this infamous Deltarune theory gets to live. I don't dislike it as much as everyone else, but this theory does make you as crazy as Jaru. I mean, maybe the Grand Fountain was always just there and Gerson found it years ago, considering his inspiration for books was dreams. But I don't know if Gaster would even count that, considering it was years ago. Okay, let's just move on. And then there's Des. She's not on the list. She has a lot of setup, so shouldn't she be important? Isn't she like stuck in the code, like in some sort of dark world? Shouldn't that discredit this theory a bit? No, there are some explanations for this, and it does explain her absence well, even with or without this theory about the Gunner Maker names. With these possibilities, Des would either be indirectly on the list or not at all. She's stuck somewhere else. She's stuck in the dark world. Toby forgot and decided to keep it that way. Yes, there's evidence for this. Or Toby doesn't want to spoil the game. The code that people think is her could really be anywhere. Somewhere that's out of this world, a darker dark world, one that's darker than dark. Maybe Gaster doesn't count this as the same thing. There is one theory on where this code is that could work with this not being a dark world. There's a water-type realm where all darkness flows before it creates dark fountains. This realm would be different from a dark world. The phrasing depths for the background in the Garner Maker and the ocean audio file playing when you first enter a dark world, dark fountains, and that weird song Onion San heard from below the ocean seem to be pointing to darkness being related to water in some way. Some people think the Garner Maker takes place in depths. The files related to this Garner Maker all have the same naming conventions, all uppercase. Since darkness is what's holding dark worlds together, you can view it as the code for it. So it makes sense that the unused code for her is in the depths. She even points out how dark it is there. Just like in the depth of the ocean. There is a Gaster motif in Noelle's theme, because December is a video game secret, just like Gaster. And Noelle likes weird secrets in video games. And that should be hinting at December possibly being in the same place as him. If Gaster is gastering from within the fountains, from the depths, for example like he did with Spampton, then Des could have tried to do the same. She isn't just trying to talk to Kris, but Noelle too.
Noelle
Feels so nostalgic when exploring the dark world. She sensed her sister in a way. There is also the chance this code isn't her, but let's not entertain that for any longer. There is something in the game that's very obviously wink wink nudge nudging at you not being able to get any reaction from typing her name. The spelling bee contest. Because some dumbass decided that December was gonna be a word for the contestants to spell, so Noelle ended up losing. She was not able to spell her name. And this feels like a reference to how we can't get anything out of typing her name to get a reaction. She was forgotten, after all. She is nowhere to be found. There's very little trace of her left. Not even on this list. So it fits thematically at least. There are similar in-universe events that call back to something meta, like you making the vessel and then the characters making a trash machine. Making a thing out of separate parts and it being discarded. And then it comes back. The vessel hasn't come back yet, but people think it will. Okay, but what about that next one though? Toby forgot to add her? Maybe. On 2017, on the 2-year anniversary of Undertale, the official Undertale Tumblr account posted a preview of a little mini project that was being worked on around that time, called the Undertale Alarm Clock app. We get new special dialogue for a bunch of different characters, one of them being Asgore. The thing we're looking for here is him talking about Rudy, which is just the Undertale version of Rudy. The Christmas themes are all there. When he talks about his family, he says his daughter and wife. Just one daughter. That's a little odd. In 2020, on the 5th year anniversary, Toby announced that the app was no more, while also showing off the dialogue that was gonna be on the app. For whatever reason, Rudy now has multiple daughters. 2, 3, 4, probably 2. But which one came first? Noelle or Des? Noelle. Toby showed off some concept art all the way back from 2014/15 of the main characters, with the file being the Fun Gang, and Noelle is right there. I doubt this is supposed to be Des, considering Noelle actually shows up enough in the plot to be considered a part of the Fun Gang. That means that Des hasn't always existed. If the old alarm clock dialogue from 2017 only had one daughter, then that could mean that Des is a rather late addition to the game. The first chapter of Deltarune only came out 1 year later. Plenty of stuff could have happened throughout the game's development, of course. But if she was that late, then maybe Toby forgot to add her to one of the first things you see in the game, the opening. And then he noticed later that he forgot and decided to keep it as is, because it fits thematically. Toby would then later make a reference to Des being gone from this set of names in chapter 2.
Plus, she's like totally stuck in the depths anyways. So it wouldn't matter to him if he forgot, cause he could just say that it's not a dark world, which it isn't, I guess.
If there was someone else that's not Des that he forgot to add, then that would be fine. He could just add them in because they're not gone in universe. This is mostly just speculation at the end of the day. That's just how it is using outside game content. You would think Toby planned her from the very start, with how important it seems like she is, but it ain't that big of a deal because the game is great so far. I don't know how convincing this is to people, but there are plenty of great videos about what happened to Des and in what ways she's forgotten, like in Spooky Dude's video. I realize I'm pretty confident that all of these explanations apply to some degree, which would mean she isn't on the list anyway. If where she's stuck is considered a dark world, and the reason she isn't on the list is because she's just forgotten, then she is on the list indirectly. And that begs the question, will she make or enter a dark world? This is where that third possible knight candidate comes in. She could be in the Making Dark Fountains list. She could be the knight. She is just a kid with sympathetic reasons after all. While I am a fan of the story potential of this theory with her going crazy in a dark place, her being stuck in that dark place is also the problem with this theory. Dark worlds represents forms of escapism, so the roaring is like too much of a good thing, and if causing the roaring is supposed to represent getting lost in fiction, then why would Des, after being stuck in darkness, make a bunch of dark fountains, of all things? Why would she do that? I think she would want to avoid dark fountains at all costs. It's also weird that she's running around in the light world making fountains to begin with. The Gaster motif is in Noelle's theme, and the sisters have thematic connections to Gaster. Gaster is a creepy video game secret, and so is Des. Noelle likes finding video game secrets. It would be really strange for her to be running around making fountains and going against what's set up thematically. Like I showed earlier, Des was a late addition to the game, so her being the knight is pretty unlikely, I think. So I think it's safe to conclude that Des is not very wonderful, unfortunately. Now, there is one final point that doesn't really have an in-universe explanation. It's just there for the sake of convenience. Toby wouldn't want to spoil the game. Des and also some other characters should be on there considering the build-up they have.
But
We haven't met them yet, so it would spoil the game, along with the knight reveal, which might be one of those important characters. The Gunner Maker telling us who'll interact with the Dark Worlds would be spoiling the game. I find this argument silly, because 1, it can't be all 3 of them who's the knight. 2, it's still not an importance list. And 3, people have talked about Des a bunch. She has plenty of fan art and so on. People know her. I like the argument that the characters we haven't physically seen yet can't be on the list a little more, because it's somewhat closer to an in-universe reason. It's why Des and Mayor aren't there, but neither have we seen Gerson.
and Asriel.
Unless you count Undertale, and now we're getting into territory I don't want to go into. So let's just say, no, you haven't seen Gerson.
And Asriel.
If it turns out Toby didn't want to spoil the importance of characters like Des, then great! It still works fine with my theory, but wouldn't that mean that the names would be added to the Gunner Maker sequence when it's no longer a spoiler? But doesn't this take place somewhere in the story? How can it even change like that? Gaster connected us to this world for whatever reason. Gaster knows the prophecy and stuff, so why would his reaction for the names change over each chapter? Remember the reactions you could get in Undertale? There was none of that in the demo, not even for Gaster. It was something that was added in later for fun, but in Deltarune, it was there since the Chapter 1 demo. This is now diegetic to the game, so it can't really change from what I know. Does it even make sense in universe? No. I don't think so. At least with the Gunner Maker names being who will enter and make the Dark Worlds. And I don't think that's spoiling the game either. Toby Fox wouldn't spoil this is not a very good argument. It's used to brush off evidence. If this really is spoiling the game, then shouldn't you be convinced by the theory? If someone's still making arguments against it, then that means you haven't been spoiled. It contradicts itself. And even then, this would just be foreshadowing, which is just subtle spoilers. That goes for anything. You're not gonna know it was a spoiler until you replay the game after everything is out and go, oh, I should have seen that coming. This feels like a disservice to Toby. It's a good thing that he's able to trust the audience when he's writing, you know? I mean, we're all gonna have different ideas on where the game will go, of course. But still, one could say that this character shouldn't be here, or this character is more important, or that there are too many characters for the game to handle. But constant theorizing whether or not you think someone like Alvin is really that important has built up this game a lot. Theorists are viewing the game through a specific lens. How can one know that that guy is really important? It could be this guy actually, or this guy actually. It's all just theorizing, so a lot more things get brought up all at once. Pretty sure most people will be satisfied either way, because it's Toby Fox. People have liked what he has done so far. Also, there being a lot of characters is not a concern, as Toby said in the summer newsletter that Chapter 2 isn't gonna be the biggest chapter anymore, which is pretty exciting, all things considered. We're also building up the night as this big bad. We know they're a singular person. Look at this stuff. Outside game content with relation to the night. If the night is anyone that makes the fountain, and those three people really are Kris, Susie, and Noelle, then wouldn't that contradict the scrapped opening? Toby talks like the night is one person. Revealing that it's not one person would be lying if you showed a supposedly fake night at the top of the stairs, or whatever. There wasn't an actual scrapped opening. Just a scrapped song that Toby had imagined stuff for. But just put that in your mind. Now, you don't see a lot of discussions about why this opening was even scrapped. Just it being used as evidence against Kris Night. While I think this being scrapped and it being really early is good enough as a point, I've thought about it for a while, so now I have a more in-depth, updated version of that. I have some explanations for why this opening was even scrapped. The opening would be bad for the story. It wouldn't fit anywhere in universe. And afterwards, I want to talk about how Toby is referring to an actual individual when saying the night. And it could still make sense if you really think outside the box. But let's start with the opening would be bad for the story. Because it seems like the opposing side was onto something. Because you're right, it would be bad. Back when Undertale was just a demo, he was pretty vague about Frisk's purpose. He said that he wished he could talk about it. If you finish the pacifist route, you would know that the name we gave them at the start of the game was actually to the first fallen human. The twist shows that Frisk is their own individual person, and that you're supposed to leave the game alone after that point. Everyone has gotten their happy ending. And playing the weird route in Undertale, and yes, I'm calling it that, you'll learn that the fallen human is a manifestation of gamers. It's a twist that's withholding information and tricks you into thinking you knew what you knew. This wasn't Kris. It's the first fallen human after the monster war. You aren't naming the character you'll be playing as, just the fallen human. It could be any the fallen human. The game is just withholding information, just like the night twist. When Toby said the night, he could be referring to multiple things. Let's just say that Toby doesn't want to show the main three characters because it would be crowded. And since it sounds like he's just saying one person, he wants to play into this twist that the night character he thought was a character doesn't exist. If Toby were to make up a night character just to use at the top of the stairs, or there already was one, and it's later revealed that there isn't one, then that would be lying. If he wrote name the character you'll be playing as in Undertale, and it's later revealed that it's not, then that would be lying. And Undertale would have been worse too. He might have been unsure how to do what he wanted to do with the opening. The opening being there could have actually made the game worse. The presence of the night is already pretty vague, so there being a twist like this wouldn't be the most batshit insane thing ever. Toby didn't reveal one of the big twists in Undertale before the game was finished, so why would he do that here? The game already wants you to think that there is the night. You could argue there's still the night, or that he's just referring to the Force, and Toby isn't even playing along with the twist. He might have scrapped it because he wasn't able to figure out how he could represent it. If all of this is the case, why reveal this information if you don't want the opening to ruin the game? Firstly, Toby couldn't have known that this one thing he said in the anniversary livestream would be this big of a thing to get mentioned in theorizing. One can't exactly know what will get big. Secondly, not everyone knows about this one piece of information. But you know what everyone does know?
Me.
Like I showed earlier, Gaster is heavily tied to the program. The save menus, they are diegetic to the game. We have all of these uppercase files, which are related to Gaster and the program he has us connected to. So where exactly could this opening even be in the game? It doesn't really fit with how the menus are laid out. Gaster can't put these characters into an opening like this. He didn't create this universe. Why would Gaster show us this opening? Why would he treat us like we aren't doing an experiment? With this in mind, it's clear that this opening song idea was made just for fun. it was quite old since it was made before thinking about the meta-narrative stuff. Art is not made at an instant. Some say that the reason there are placeholder animations for the chapter openings all the way up to 10 is because Toby was unsure how long the game would be really early on. Not sure if I agree with that, but what about Bone Trousel and Heartache? One song was originally supposed to be a random battle theme, and one for a boss battle for Joker character, both for a game based on a dream he had. He has made songs for fun without hesitation, and that makes sense because making music is fun. People act like Toby had absolutely everything that will be in the game planned from the start, but this shows otherwise. Heck, there are things Toby has changed about the game after Chapter 1 came out. The computer lab door was retconned to be a double door, and typing Gaster's name used to close the game, but now it just resets. Just because it was based on a dream doesn't mean that every single plot relevant thing came from it. Like Des, she was a late addition, remember? Maybe it did, I don't know. The thing that does it for me though is the fallen human twist in Undertale. The character in the opening wasn't even Kara at one point. It was the main character. If something that fucking big can change, then so can this hypothetical Deltarune opening. An evil bad guy could be near for you, but it will grow and Noelle bleed for him. The dog is making what he wants for now, and maybe it could be 3 nights, maybe it could be 3 nights, maybe it could be 3 nights for sure. One day you'll hear it's not that good for them. I see fractal incompetence for me. Hard work won't make you good as dog for sure. But maybe it could be 3 nights, maybe it could be 3 nights, maybe it could be 3 nights for now. Maybe it could be one night, maybe it could be one night, but who? If Toby withholding information isn't convincing to you, and you think he isn't referring to it as a force, then who could be on top? I have a couple of explanations for what Toby actually meant by the night in this text. Because guess what? It can still make sense with this theory. The fun gang, Kris, Gaster, and the scrap knight character, which is totally a legit possibility. That first one though, it could be Kris, Susie, and Noelle at the top of the stairs if you really wanted to. Like, it could be, just like God. Why is nobody questioning that about God? It's just 3 people. They're technically all the Knight. What about plain old Kris Knight? Since this is just an opening and is probably not canon, you can basically do whatever you want. There could be 2 Krises, like I said in the last video. Some people have said that it would spoil the game, and I thought, the player isn't gonna know that Kris is supposed to be the Knight just because they're on top of the stairs. Not until the end of chapter 2, ever since that last video. But how is the player even supposed to know afterwards that the second Kris is supposed to represent the Knight? That's not exactly what Toby wants. The player is supposed to see the Kris walking up the stairs as them and the Kris on top as Kris themselves. The fact that Toby is differentiating us and Kris by calling Kris the Knight here only makes the separation between the player and Kris even stronger. He's continuing this character dynamic, so Kris being the Knight helps that distinction. Imagine seeing this opening and then seeing Kris doing their own separate thing from us. It makes perfect sense as is, and is impactful as well. And if anyone Knight is true, and it is just one singular person that Toby is referring to, then if Kris was the only one who showed up on top, then that wouldn't be lying. They are the Knight. Though that could maybe miscommunicate the idea that the Knight is a bigger presence, which could negatively affect the actual twist. Though there's really no way of knowing here for sure. Alright, what if it's Gaster on top of the stairs? It could be going as far as the Knight being Gaster because of the Gastering like I proposed. This would be a great way for Toby to actually talk about Gaster without saying his name directly, because we all know how he feels about that. This is a cool workaround, and yeah, I don't really have much more to say besides that. This one is just really simple to explain. And now we're on the last one. My scrapped Knight theory was a fake out. I'm just kidding, it's still in the video. But I looked too much into one of the points I was making. The analysis ended up so big, it became its own thing separate from the mini theory. So, the Knight might have been a character long before chapter 1. Toby has changed other things before and since. The arrangement was really early and also just an idea. It means something like this isn't entirely out of the picture. Maybe the old idea was that Kris was the only Knight, but Toby realized later that he was gonna do Kris Susie Knight, which is just a close neighbor.
But speaking of old music tracks that Toby made that one might think debunks my theory.
This song is a fan-made song for the character Nightmare Knight from Cucumber Quest. Some people think this song shows up in Deltarune, and you know what, fair, that makes sense. The other fan song he made for this comic did end up as a Mettaton motif. It also shares the name Knight. This might seem like an obvious jab at my theory, this might be a stretch for some, but I also have a lot to say. I even did some burglary. Yes, we're gonna see if this song shows up in Deltarune. I wasn't able to steal the whole machine. If this video was called Everything About the Nightmare Knights motif in the Deltarune soundtrack, a musical myth-busting odyssey, then sure, I would have. The best thing I can do with this machine is to connect it to my computer. I don't think the motif is that important. And the tracks, one could say, actually used it, paint a very specific picture of it. Even without a mini scrap Knight theory, it helps my larger case anyway. I just went out what was said in these 2 videos. So where does it actually show up according to people? Here are some examples of when it shows up. In total, with just 9 songs, if I'm counting correctly. Some of these are just variants of other songs, so if I forgot anything, it's probably a variant. It's not a lot to go through, but let's just get started. You heard it. That's the main melodic motif that people think shows up in Deltarune. Unlike the Gaster motif, this is actually a clear-cut melody with more movement, though you can cut it down to just this.
Cause that's the part people seem to be hearing everywhere.
This set of lower notes and then this walk down a major 7th chord. This motif is also shown in the video. Though there's only one Deltarune song this supposedly shows up in. The video also shows a motif that's just an arpeggio, and it not matching with stuff, go figure. The two times I would say it actually shows up would be in the door and the chase. And even then, it has changed a little. It has the same shape and almost the same notes, but this part of the melody was moved back by one note.
And then it moves up to a completely new note.
This is how it shows up in both of these.
Usually in all the
Other examples, it only goes by once before other stuff in the song happens. They do end up sounding a little different in the end. I'll say that though, a lot of later analysis only really works if this melody that shows up two times was intended to sound like an old song that he made.
it being based on the song basically.
But I don't know about any other old Toby Fox songs that happen to show up in Deltarune with a slightly altered melody. But let's move on to the next one. This melody that shows up in the legend, Empty Town, along with some other songs, feel like a stretch to me. If you look at just the notes, then you've got these. But this part was crammed in to be half its length, and then the rest of the melody was moved back with it.
Or was this part lengthened? Almost like you can't make them fit rhythmically. Not like these two songs are in different time signatures, and you have to accommodate for that change. JK, all the songs here are in 4/4. Also, these notes are changed LOL.
Here you have to change so much for it to become the same. The more and more you change the rhythm and notes and placements will make it sound completely different in context.
Why don't I do some examples?
This movement downwards is just a walk down a major chord.
And these are just the notes of the one chord in the minor key.
Of course you're gonna end up with coincidences like this. And you have to swap the last two notes. Does it really matter when so much about it has been changed?
They don't even sound similar. I don't even know what you're hearing. Are you like a four-dimensional being or something?
The motif shows up in Jewel's battle motif for 2 seconds. Twice. First things that's off, they start on different scale degrees, which means I couldn't transcribe the songs to the same key.
To show the similarities clearer.
This phrase could be written in a different mode, based on one of the different scale degrees.
Like the door and chase, but here they don't even match, or look like what Nightmare Night could have been if it was a different mode. This song only goes between major and minor. The intro is in minor with these chords. The phrase starts and ends on notes from the one chord of the minor key, the chord it loops back to. Thus it reinforces its mode, which is why Peach Boy here feels inclined to believe Toby might not have been thinking about Nightmare Night with how this phrase is written in relation to the key.
I mean, it can still work. They both have a structure of 3 notes that go up and down, which punches itself up and then goes down to a sustain note, almost. Comparing those first 3 notes, we see that the Jewel phrase has a tricilo rhythm instead, and that the notes aren't even the same. The interval it jumps down to is bigger, and it doesn't even jump back up to the starting note again. When it jumps all the way up here in Nightmare Night, it's
a major 6th,
but in Deltarune, it goes up
a major 7th
instead, which might be fine because it expresses the same sort of leap, but like you probably saw, when it's supposed to go down, it decides to jump down a little early, only for it to go up to a sustained note instead of downwards. It doesn't match with the door and the chase either. And it's also just one part of this repeating phrase that you could call similar. You thought Penumbra Phantasm was in the Holy. Well, guess what? Nightmare Night might be there too. It uses this part of the Nightmare Night melody to create a completely new melody. You could say it's based on the arpeggio in this section.
He's taking a part from the main melody and turning it into something new in this section. So he could be doing that again for the Holy.
And even then, it's an arpeggio. You're gonna end up with similar arpeggios like this eventually.
If you change the notes and look at the pixels, then you'll see that
This again? Really? Sure, it has the same movement down, but these two notes are swapped and it goes up instead of down. This part has the same rhythm, except for this. But all of these notes are completely different.
But these notes are
The same, but it doesn't sound the same in context. It's silly to only look at the rhythm. I guess the night is a secret blue version of Ralsei, and Noelle is Adam Sandler. Also this. Noelle's theme has this very distinct walk-up, a major 7th chord, which is just not present in the original Nightmare Night theme.
People have pointed at this phrase in the B section sounding more like Noelle's theme.
They look and sound even less alike. This melody doesn't match with Nightmare Night or The Door, and if it did, then it would have conflicting ideas. So I can't see Death Knight as a big likelihood. Okay, what is this trying to show us? Some notes go down and then do a dramatic longer note. And the second time the dramatic note goes more up. It's vague at best. Nightmare Night has the notes not even going on beat. And it has 4 notes in total instead of 3.
In its repeating motif.
Like The Dark Truth. And this was the first thing that threw me off. Actually, looking at the notes, it doesn't really fit. In Deltarune, it goes
Down
up a major 2nd and then up a perfect 4th. While on Nightmare Night, it goes down a major 3rd and then up a tritone of all things. The second repetition in the last note only goes up by 1 semitone, while that leap is a bit bigger in Deltarune. It starts out dissonant at first. Even when it does get more consonant, it sounds nothing alike, because the intervals between the notes are much bigger. The leaps are big. This structure of a sort of short pause or a few notes, then a long dramatic part, which changes on repetition, can be found elsewhere, like in Asgore. Which honestly sounds more like The Dark Truth. And then there's Your Best Nightmare. Which sounds more like Nightmare Night, which at least actually has note and interval changes similar to each other, even if they're not identical. You know what The Dark Truth actually has similarities with? That's probably something. I saw Noelle as the one to eventually cause the roaring, but this could be interesting too.
Hold the f up. Why does to Susie related tracks in the files have Neo in their names?
Oh. When you're making music, then of course patterns will come up, or you'll do stuff that's been written before. Melodies and phrases can be sequenced in different ways, so in context, it will sound very different if you don't disregard rhythm. I guess the night is a demigorgon. I guess the night is a dinosaur.
Asgore is Lost Girl.
Music I've made. Look at this. From 2022. That's how you know I'm not fucking cheating. It's on Discord. You know, this is the real Discord. Look. Here that's the song. That's the song. Here. This part right here. I almost forgot. But either way, I'm pretty glad I took my time to transcribe these, because it was fun. I definitely got something new out of this. Time for the actual theorizing and analysis based on what we found. This wasn't the first thing that caught my eye, but this motif doesn't even match up with each instant it shows up melodically. It's only the same in the door and the chase. Compared to how it sounds in those two songs, Noelle's theme, The World Revolving, and The Legend, they're all different. In the door and the chase, it has that jump up slightly early. It doesn't do that anywhere else. You could say The Legend, but it was moved back yet another note earlier there, which wasn't done in the door/chase. Even then, the melody is just too different. It's too different. I think it's made abundantly clear that this isn't related, because Ralsei sings it in battle. So I don't think I'm wrong to assume that this is Ralsei's leitmotif. It's a separate leitmotif from the door and the chase. From what I see, these are all different melodies or motifs. If this is supposed to be one clear, distinct motif, then it should be similar each time it shows up. With how little it's showing up, wouldn't it be better to have it be properly present in all of these if Knight really is a proper character? I'm trying my best to reach a conclusion based on a smaller collection of songs, and most of those aren't used for anything special. If you treat all the examples as legit, it creates a lot of questions that don't make any sense. Like, why does the motif show up in one of Jevel's tracks only for a little bit, and then there's nothing like this in Spamton's track? Jevel is in the Dark World made by the Knight, but Spamton isn't? Was it the main Knight we're going against that made the Card Kingdom fountain? Well, that still proves the Anyone Knight theory, since the second fountain was still made by the Knight. What does the Knight have anything to do with you being chased by Lancer? What does the Knight have anything to do with you being chased by some guards? What does the Knight have anything to do with a random mouse puzzle? Why does it only play at the start of the sequence before a different character comes in and a new song with their motif starts playing instead, as if the previous song was just an afterthought? I thought the Knight was supposed to be important. This motif does show up in places that should fit, like opening the door to a fountain which had to be created by someone like the Knight, or just a Knight. The motif in the door and the holy could be the same motif, story-wise at least. I don't really think so considering how they're used, but if it is the case, then the Knight actually made the first 3 fountains so far, since this motif shows up for all of the fountains. There aren't any theories that I know of on the Knight making this fountain and then doing it in a special way to make it the way it is. But for Kris being the Knight, there is at least one. Okay, let's just move on. So what about Anyone Knight? If the Grand Fountain is special because Gaster stuff, then that would imply that he's the Knight of that Dark World, with this being a sort of leitmotif for this connection between the Fountain Maker and the fountain itself.
This point still stands with just the door being a Knight motif, except now we have no idea if the Card Kingdom was made by the Knight. And with just the Holy, we have no idea if they made the Grand Fountain yet. So if something is a motif for the fountain and fountain creator relationship, then it's probably just the Holy.
So no matter how you look at it, the theory lives. Hell yeah. What about the door? It being in Noelle's theme is fine because Death Knight exists, but it falls flat considering what else it's pointing towards. So, Ralsei talking about the Roaring Fits, because that is something the Knight would end up causing. Though, like I said before, the Knight doesn't even show up in either of Ralsei's story dumps. Ralsei doesn't even care about the Knight, so, there isn't really a thematic connection for this motif. Supposed placements of this motif have in-game content undermining their exact placement. Even if you remove some of the unfitting ones, you still get Lancer and the random mouse puzzle. With just these 2 songs, it's really just the motif for generic tension and spooky stuff. And that undermines the existence of a singular Knight. Maybe the lack of thematic connection is the thematic connection. Though one could say that it didn't even make perfect sense in Undertale. Can you really call this a hotel? I didn't receive a mint under my pillow or anything. Uses the main motif of Undertale. What does this mean lore-wise? For a while, I thought there wasn't much to some Undertale songs, when this was first pointed out to me before any of the theorizing. But this video by Dork made me realize that there was more to the leitmotifs in Once Upon a Time and Snowden. Dork said that the leitmotif is used for a lot of places that are friendly and welcoming. It represents all the friendships and connections you make throughout the game and the game as a whole, since that's what Undertale is all about. But this minigame isn't really welcoming. But Mettaton does own the hotel and this song plays when you're fighting Mettaton. And the word hotel is in the title of the song, which could also mean this was originally going to play there in whatever place. So I wouldn't call this random. This Undertale motif doesn't even represent the character. It represents an idea, a feeling. It's something you can do a bit more with in general. So, what about an actual character though? Like Asriel. His theme was used way more sparingly. It's in memory when you give an umbrella to a statue with horns similar to the Dreamers. It also plays in a sort of flashback sequence that has Asriel in it, in the waterfall. Finale, a song that plays when you battle Flowey, who's Asriel. Undertale, which tells the story of Asriel and his death. The Choice, the song that plays immediately afterwards when you talk to Sans. So it is kind of connected, even if that's a different character, but it is really pole stretched, so nobody is gonna notice the melody. The part that is pole stretched is when Once Upon a Time is the main focus, but it seems to be used closer to how the motif was used, since it plays when Sans says you gained no LV and you've only shown compassion towards others. And also at the end of the Asker battle when you're supposed to spare him, because you gain no LV after all. Also this. Memory also plays right afterwards, when he starts talking about taking care of you like a parent, with the subtext being that he's feeling nostalgic and thinking about his son. And his theme, which plays in the climax of the Asriel battle. This is absolutely not random, but with how little Nightmare Night is in Deltarune, it should be used fittingly, but it's not. There isn't a Nightmare Night. Door would be more like Once Upon a Time if it really is a night motif. It stays winning. Okay, but what does this have to do with there being a scrapped night character? Well, looking at where in the game the door and the chase first appeared, it is early in chapter 1, both at the start, right after each other. And like I said, this exact motif doesn't show up again. It was made with the idea of what the sequence was gonna be, or it was made really early on in the actual game's development. There might be a chance the Knight was a character that existed by the time these songs were made. Toby then thought about the Knight a bit more, and then realized he wanted to not do this big bad Knight idea, which is what he's referring to in the text. They just don't exist anymore. He might have thought about continuing to use the character just for the opening, as a way to play into the twist, and then realized it would be lying to the audience, like I explained earlier. It's a little weird for him to throw out his leitmotifs like that, but he has songs like the old version of the song that plays during class, where it used Don't Forget, but he scrapped it because he didn't want to overuse the leitmotif. He threw his leitmotifs at the song without thinking too much about it. And that happens. But if the Knight is supposed to be a proper character, why keep the two songs with the supposed leitmotif that only throw around said leitmotif? Doesn't make sense. That's how— Hey, wait a minute! This motif doesn't even appear in the scrapped opening! Now, it could just be that Toby didn't want to use it because it's just an intro for the game and it doesn't need motifs of every important character. So he wanted to use Don't Forget for the billionth time instead. Which just strengthens that other point. Or it could be that the Knight just isn't the Knight. That means the idea that the Knight isn't an actual character must have been there really early. And it means some of this analysis is a little bit redundant, because then these songs weren't really written with a Knight in mind to begin with. So no, he isn't lying if this is the case. It's right there in the song. Heck, you might not even think Nightmare Night is in Deltarune, considering it's not an exact match. I'm now mostly done with this Anyone Night theory as a whole. But I have one thing to talk about that's relevant to both this and Kris Knight. I think we need a breather after that previous part. Luckily, we're now on the part of the video where it's no longer a good sequel. It's now just gonna be the same video again, but more of the same. Maybe you're not convinced Kris is the knight, then this part is for you. Deltarune, Kris is the knight, Mega Theory, Part 2. This line is literally taken out of context. I got the idea that the closet represented Giga Queen and the city from this video, but I had completely forgotten about this line when adding it to my video. It makes it more clear that yes, it's just another thing you came across in the dark world, just like everything else in the room.
Cause it would be referring to the knight hiding there if it was just the large person line.
The secret bosses might not even be crazy because of whatever the Shadow Crystal showed them. The Shadow Crystal was something Jevil had since Gaster came and Gastered. But for Spampton,
we have no idea cause he was Gaster pilled through the phone. And I am pretty sure you can't send objects through the phone.
Which means the Shadow Crystal is actually doing something else. That means Kris couldn't have seen what they saw through the crystal and stopped doing their plan, knowing what would happen to begin with. I made 2 points on how the game over screen doesn't debunk Kris Knight. For the first one, I said it could be from your point of view, and the world going to darkness is not because of Kris dying. Molly Stars made a great video where in the middle of it, she made the same point about it being from the player's point of view, and she explained it much better than I could. So I'm mentioning this here. I don't want to explain it, because then I would have to give context for her video, and my video is probably long enough, so here's the timestamp, check it out if you want. After Chapter 1, the rest of the game was originally going to release all at once. That meant that people were gonna play through the chapters immediately after one ends. That seriously begs the question, why have this big twist of Kris making a fountain, implying that they made the other ones, but actually that's what Toby Fox wants the casual player to think, and if you analyze all the evidence, then it's just this fountain they made, only for the next chapter to immediately be like, oh yeah, it wasn't the knight that made this world, I have no idea. There would be 0 seconds to theorize. This would be a red herring for like 10 seconds. It would be pointless. Structurally, it being a red herring only makes sense in the current release schedule, but it wasn't like that before. Toby has said that Chapter 3 is much more focused on gameplay. That's because Kris made the fountain and not the knight. That means its will is different. I don't think it has to be based on that. You know what TVs are known for? Switching between channels, where you can watch a lot of different stuff with a lot of different genres. The reason it's gameplay focused is because that's how a TV works. Stuff always changes. Someone said that it doesn't make sense because you could do the same with the Cyberworld Dark World, but on the internet you have links that take you from different places gradually. You're walking around. On TV, it's instant. There's also the fact that Chapter 3 is following such a big plot reveal. So following it up with a lot of plot would probably be overwhelming to the audience. People say that since this door closed out of nowhere when Kris and Susie first entered the dark world, there had to be someone that closed it. I don't know how to tell you this, but this is the same game with magic fountains being able to create entire worlds. I think the fountains can just do this by itself. I mean, when we entered the library, the dark world door Noelle and Birdley went through is closed. And hey, remember how I established gastering inside of the fountains? It could be Gaster who closed it. It really isn't a stretch to make. There might be someone there. I could imagine that. But like, was the fountain made just now and the knight was waiting for them to go inside and then close it? Feels a bit convenient. If there being no one to close the door is too big of a stretch, then I would say it's just Alfie's. Susie only saw light, Alfie's only saw dark, so she went up to check on them with the door being open. She thought they probably just left and closed the door, assuming they didn't come back because they didn't find anything. I've seen this one line at the start of the chapter being used.
Used as proof that the fountain was made when they were trying to study. Cause I say hell of a study session.
It does nothing. Noelle and Birdley went to the library to have a study session, and then they fell down into the dark world, and the study session becomes an adventure through the dark world and such. It works either way, but as we know, them falling asleep makes absolutely no sense with the timeline. It's not like this is something they could have said that they were gonna do to Queen, or it's something Queen just happened to know for no reason. Not like that's happened before with Darkness. I didn't think about this, but we can clearly see that Noelle was trying to defend herself, and the NPCs mention her. It's like they fell down, were confused and such, and Queen came along. If they were asleep, then Queen could have easily captured them immediately. We know that your conscious state goes from what it was in the light world to the dark world, because we get a preview of a waking up sprite for Susie for chapter 3, and also Birdly dying. The fountain for that world was made while 2 people were asleep, and it's clear they stayed asleep when they entered it. That's the final nail in that flimsy theory. Actually, there's one more thing. How does them being asleep even make sense to begin with? As we see, the conscious state you have gets translated over from the light world to the dark world and the other way around. If, let's say, they did fall asleep and then they woke up in the dark world, then why are they asleep again at the end? A very obvious hole I should have noticed earlier. So, something must have happened here. I don't know, but the likelihood of it being Ralsei pacifying them is likely, actually. The commenter Bryce Dion Sky Warrior 6951 left some points about how it could be the explanation for why Birdly and Noelle were asleep. Birdly tried making a fountain, which is something Ralsei doesn't want from the looks of it, at least from Birdly. Making him think it was a dream would make him forget about it. There are already 2 lighteners in on the dark world business. There doesn't need to be more. Ralsei did stay behind with Noelle and Birdly, while Kris and Susie went to seal the fountain. So, he did have the chance. Ignoring the TV obviously being plugged in, along with the other planned out stuff, then you have a couple of Kris Knight deniers saying that Kris was just improvising, which I think is dubious, but what interests me here is that their motivation is supposedly to break free of the prophecy. Kris making a fountain is something that separates the player from them, but it doesn't make sense for them to be doing it because they want to break free from the prophecy. If the weird root is setting itself up as it is that. We know the weird root isn't something you're supposed to do because the game falls apart. Kris's goal, as we figured out in the previous video, is to find Des, and in the weird root, Des gets mentioned way less. Her mentions are only optional now. You're also skipping ahead multiple areas. You get a worse story. Ralsei telling Queen about the roaring comes out of nowhere when Birdly is not in the story. Ralsei will act confused when the story isn't going as it's supposed to, as if that was supposed to happen. And also no eggs. The game does not let you collect those. The weird route is trying to set itself up as this way of breaking the prophecy. The weird route is set up as the last resort, and it's meant to show that some people are willing to go to extreme degrees to get what they want. You would care too much about reaching the end when there are more important things than reaching the end. The game is sort of falling apart. Whether or not it will work is a different story. With this in mind, the motivation for making the fountain has to be something different if the idea of breaking the prophecy is put heavy focus on in this alternate route. How can they be the knight if they're worried about the fate of the world? They literally made a fountain. They're crossing a line whether or not they even are the knight. So this is a non-argument.
I'm soon at the end, baby.
But there is one loose end left in this entire theory. It isn't super big, but it's pretty important because it will happen in the next chapters we're getting. It's what's gonna decide whether or not our theories are correct. What theories will continue to coexist before they die off later instead? Will Kris Knight die? Will the debate continue, or will Kris Knight win? Chapter 3 and 4 are right around the corner. For real this time. So, what about the fountain for Chapter 4 though? How is Kris gonna be able to make it? Won't that one be made during the day? Because by the time you're finished with the Dark World, it would be morning, right? Toby also released a track for the 2022 status update before the newsletter were a thing you could subscribe to, called Hometown Day, with the caption, "After the dark night, the sun shines brightly," which is referring to the night that Chapter 3 Dark World takes place in, coming to an end. Not just that, but the tracks are paired up with these screenshots of Susie and Kris exploring Hometown, with the fine names for the images having Chapter 4 in them, C4. That means we probably won't be exploring Hometown before Chapter 3 ends, which means Kris has to make the fountain during the day. Won't they be seen? So how's that gonna work?
Is any of this really necessary? Does this theory need to be perfect? Do I need to go back and update every opinion on the game I had just to look good? I mean, I'm making a theory video, so I should at least go across everything. I wanted to make this to get everything I believe about the night out there. I genuinely believe this is where the game is going, but With the Chapter 4 Dark World location, I don't really have one idea. Instead of picking anything specific to believe, I pick nothing, thinking I'm gonna be wrong if I pick something. And I can't be wrong. No matter who the knight actually is, Kris being knight is what the game wants you to think. It makes sense when the Kris knight is like, oh, but it is them, but it is them. People will say, I told you so, to the end of time after others have said for years that Kris knight was impossible, only for it to be the thing that happens. That makes sense, and I really want to do that too, and I probably will. But are people looking at art and storytelling the wrong way for not believing what the game says? Am I looking at art the bad way? If my theory is bad, that means I'm looking at the game the wrong way. That means I'm a bad artist. No amount of hard work or time will make me good. I don't have the special sauce that makes whatever I throw together morph into being good. If my theory is wrong, then the superiority falls apart. I feel like I was just making the original Kris Knight video to feel better than everyone else. Probably shows. Probably just projecting my current feelings at the moment. I wanted to prove that I was smart, to be someone who was there to say it before the rest of the game. If my theory is wrong, then the superiority falls apart. This is where I escape to. So I'm looking for any sort of validation. I have to be good. I have to be right. And even if I am right, I'm still probably bad with art. People manage to make theories that I find incredibly improbable, engaging. But all I can say is look at this thing and look at this thing without making any connections clear. It's probably what it feels like. We're going to love the game. It's going to inspire us. And I don't want the inspiration I get from this game to ruin me like this. I don't want to look at it and compare myself. I feel like I can't be like that. I want to be able to use the time I have to be able to make stuff that will inspire people just as much as something like that. I don't want it to be impossible. I want to go through hard work and make stuff. I don't want to feel like I'm destined to always fail. I want to make my own fiction, my own place to escape to. I don't know if people care about what I'm talking about now. I don't know if it's whiny or pointless to the video. I don't know if I'm showing too much of myself. I came for a Deltarune video, but I'm putting it here because that's what I need to do. It is where I escape to. I took this too seriously. Theorizing is fun. Art is fun. I should let it be fun. I wanted to push the discussion somewhere I wanted, of course, but I don't need to convince everyone. It's not my problem if you're wrong. Some will stay loyal to the theory when they've believed in it for that long. The game is coming out extremely soon. It doesn't matter anyways. I'm making the video too late. The community has come to an end of an era, and it's obvious how it's changed just by looking at it. But at this point, the best thing we could do is wait. But first, I'm gonna pick something to believe in, for once feeling like I can be wrong.
Yeah, you don't have to theorize. I'm not saying you have to have something to believe in just for the sake of it. I absolutely feel that. But I just want to try having a little fun. Oh.
In one of the recent newsletters, Toby showed this screenshot from Chapter 4 of Noelle in some dark room with some holiday items, like presents and such. And people think this is the basement of Noelle's house, which makes sense because of the holiday items. Maybe we're getting a Dark World location here. Maybe she's the one trying to make it after thinking about the Dark World she was in earlier, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. This would be holiday themed, or video game themed like some think, because of the shitty video game she keeps playing that sucks ass. There's this concept art of Susie, Caddy, and Noelle, In this location, we can see the crop Noelle sprite does match with any other Light World location we've seen so far. So that might actually be Noelle's house. Also, a character from the Gonna Make a list is there. There's also this other concept art, and one of the drawings is of Susie and Kris at some stairs. The stairs of the basement? During the Spamton sweepstakes, there was a page that was supposed to be a page made by Noelle, where she talks about Ice-E being scary. Ice-E's Pete's seems to be a more popular pick for Dark World location than QC's Diner. He appears in the Dark World sometimes. Both their Dark Worlds would be based around food, I assume, so you can't exactly have both. But with Noelle's house, we would still be able to check off Ice-E from the checklist, considering this appearance in Noelle's house. His Dark World appearance isn't for his own place, it is here, though that would mean it could be anywhere in this house. Makes sense to foreshadow what's closer to the current chapters. More specifically, whatever Ice-E pizza is lying around would turn into Ice-E or something in the Dark World. And finally, there's the December newsletter for 2024, where he just straight up shows a Christmas tree when talking about Chapter 4. And that's it! That's everything, that's my entire theory. Boy, imagine if the entire theory is wrong, but I was right about the Chapter 4 location. That would be funny. Thank you so much for watching to the end. This whole project was not really a plan of mine. I had an idea to follow off the first video with something short, and then I realized I had way more to say. And now it's finally over. This was too long. If you're still interested in more, or feel like some hells aren't covered, then you can go check out the first part I made. It was probably a really good first attempt at a video that long, but it's not perfect, but that's just me. Since you've watched this long into a Deltarune video, then you might also be the kind of person that would be interested in a Deltarune theory survey. A survey where you rate pretty much every single Deltarune theory. Yes, I'm promoting that kind of thing at the end here. That will definitely not create any bias. Please check it out. Since you've watched this long as well, then you might as well be interested in my Patreon.
And his Ko-fi.
I posted some scrap parts from the script on there. I just post whatever I'm working on there. I just post whatever I want to this channel. I also make other stuff, like YTPMEs and also original music. Please listen to it, please. If you like what you've heard and seen, then please consider staying to see my art. Okay, that's all folks. Bye bye. Thank God I'm done.